Hello, Ethan. So this is a video continuing our samples journey. So nice work. We're able to move forward. We're getting close. So first thing, you should download this compressor plugin, the TDR Kotelnikov. I don't know. Sounds Russian. Tokyo Dawn Records. Anyways, search for this. Go here, tokyodawn.net, and download this guy. So this is like a mastering compressor. I really like it. It's super transparent, meaning it's very subtle, and that's kind of the type of compressor we're going to use a little bit in this video to make your samples sound a little bit better. So grab this Mac package, download here, and then once it's downloaded, you get this installer, just like all the other installers, I believe. So that should be pretty straightforward, and it should show up in Reaper. You do have to have Reaper closed in order to install this, and if for some reason you're not seeing it in your plugins, try rebooting your Mac, but it should work pretty well. Okay, so grab that plugin, and then let's go into Reaper. And actually, I had a file saved over here. Pick this up. Okay. So, I will try to keep this as short as I can, but there is a lot going on here. So basically, nice work with the samples. They're all their own length now, and nothing's peaking as far as I could tell. And you fixed that tom ring issue in your kick drum. That sounds good. The tom tuning is a little bit better, but still not ideal, but we'll get to that. Snare sounds better. I'm assuming that's your Power Stroke 3. I think it could sound better than it does. First thing I would probably do is probably tune it higher. It's a little, it's still a little bit ugly sounding. And actually, a lot of that could be your mic placement. And I mean, a lot of it could be the type of mic that you're using, but the placement is probably causing it to sound maybe a little bit trashier than it should. So we can go with these if you want. They're okay. Or you can try tuning it a little bit higher and mess around with your mic placement. So let me jump over here real quick. I think I showed you this in a lesson, but snare mic placement. Usually we're using a 57, a Shure SM57 for that. Let's see if we got an image. Yeah, so they get pretty nerdy here. This is kind of worth checking out though, but these are sort of all options as to where you would place a snare mic. And actually some of these are maybe a little bit further in on the head than I would place it. I might place it a little bit further out, right above the rim, or even further out from the rim. You can see there's a lot of different pictures here, but they all have this similar sort of coming in from the rim and sort of generally pointing towards the middle of the head. So you can see this example here. This mic's a lot higher, but we're still pointing towards the middle. And this guy's they're all pointing towards the middle, which is usually kind of a crucial thing. If it's pointing too much towards the edge, then it's going to get trashier sounding and you're going to get some ugly ring in there. So believe it or not, the mic placement here is actually responsible a lot for the type of sound that you're getting. And it's probably a little harder with your USB mic to sort of see this. That's a very different mic from this 57 here. But, maybe it's worth a try try some different mic placements. Do half a dozen different mic placements, different distances, different angles, and listen back and hear the difference. And to be honest, that's how we train our ears with these things. And we're gonna get into some pretty subtle details here in a second. A lot of it can seem subtle, but the best drum sounds as an end product are made by people that pay attention to these tiny details, because they really add up over time once you get past the recording and get into the mixing and then into the mastering. It's basically, this whole process is just a series of a whole bunch of little tiny steps, and if you do it right, you end up with something great. If you do it wrong, it might not be that great. So, cool. Enough about that. Let's look what we're doing today. So, basically, I got EQ on every track here, and we're going to go in and we're going to make these samples sound a little bit better through EQ. Now, this is a normal process with any recording. We always EQ, so it's not that your samples were bad. This is just sort of the next phase of making them sound even better. And we'll also look at some compression today. I'm going to turn that off. So cool. Let's just dive right in. So basically, I took some time just now before recording this video to go in here and EQ all of your samples. So I have the EQ on every track, and we'll just go in and listen, and I'll show you what I did. And basically, I want you to do the same thing, more or less. So I'm basically showing you what I did, and these are fairly common things to do. And then you're going to basically replicate what I did. Maybe sort of a boring process, but it'll get you starting to train your ears for these subtle details and frequency, and it'll get you to start to really understand how to use an EQ plugin. So let's start up here with our snare. And so I'm using the stock Reaper EQ, which is great. I like this EQ. It's easy to use. It works well. So here's the sample without EQ. Now this little checkbox up here, when it's not checked, that means the EQ is off. So this is a good way to A/B things, right? Right now the EQ is off, and we can hear the way you sent it to me, and then we'll compare it with EQ on when the box is checked, and we can hear the difference. Okay. So here's EQ off. Here's EQ on. Okay, so let's dive into it. You can see what I did here is I cut some lows. For most of this stuff, we're going to be cutting some lows, and this is just something you might do, or you pretty much always do, with things that don't really need to have that low-end frequency. So the problem is, once you start mixing, if everything has this low stuff going on, the mix just gets super low-endy and kind of boomy and potentially muddy. So a lot of times we're just cutting this stuff out from the get-go to make our lives easier. And this is a pretty conservative cut right here. I didn't come all the way down like that. I just went up a little bit. So, and then this cut here on band 2 was around 142 hertz. And this is a little bit of ringiness, like a mid-rangey ring that was in your snare that was sort of annoying me. So I cut some of that out. If we listen, I'll get more extreme with it, and hopefully we can hear what was going on there. Yeah, so you can hear there's like this low mid ring, almost a little boominess, and we just don't really want that in a snare drum. So that's why I put that. It's a sort of a little surgical move. I put that in to try to reduce that. It's still there a little bit, but not bad. This boost over here around 500 is just to give the snare a little bit more body. It was a little bit thin sounding, so we just boost there. And again, basically, you can research like what are the common EQ moves for drums, and I'll include in the email some information on that. And so you learn through that as a starting place. So like it's typical to boost around 500 on a snare drum if you want more body. But it looks like I went here to 478. So I kind of start at 500 and then I move this around until it sounds right for this particular drum. Okay, and then this boost over here at 4 is just to give it a little more attack, a little more snap to it. So that's what all that stuff is. Now, these are fairly conservative moves. Most of this stuff, I don't want to get too drastic because I don't want to trash your samples. And, basically this is almost like a pre-EQ. And then when we actually use these samples in some music, there's a good chance that we're going to want to EQ more. So a lot of times it works like this with EQ. We kind of go easy at the beginning and make smaller moves, and then the small moves add up over time and eventually get us exactly what we're going for. But we don't want to like cut out too much stuff at this phase because maybe we want that in the mix. Like once it's in a piece of music, maybe you're wishing it had more of whatever. And so we're just being sort of conservative. Okay, let's move on. Here's your rim shot. So it looks like I just did a more drastic low cut here. There was a lot more low end information. Let's see if I take this out, see if we can hear the difference. So it's pretty subtle. You really have to listen for it, and you're probably listening right now, and you're like, I can't hear the difference. And it is subtle, and the headphones matter to some degree. Unfortunately, some of this stuff you might not hear on your headphones. You kind of have to have like really transparent headphones, and your headphones are not. I know the headphones that you have, they're awesome for listening to music, but for hearing subtle frequencies, you might not be getting all the information in there. But I bet you can hear a lot of what we're going to talk about here. And maybe there is a fairly inexpensive pair of headphones that are pretty transparent. I could maybe shoot you a link for that if you wanted to get something different. But okay, so that sample, we just wanted that low cut because we don't want the all that super low information in our snare drum sound. It's just going to get in the way of other things. One thing if it was a kick drum, but a snare drum, we don't want it in there. As for the rest of it, I just left it flat. It sounded pretty good. There is a little bit of ring in there. See if we could find that ring. It's kind of right there, right around 185. So no EQ. EQ. The ring is still there, but it's reduced. But I think I didn't mess with it because it's really not that bad. And I didn't want to cut all this stuff out of your mid-range because then it makes it super thin sounding. Okay, next, cross stick. And this sounds great. Just a simple low cut there. Everything else is working. High tom. Okay, so before we look at EQ, I changed your pitch. So you can see up here, if you, let's see, if you highlight and then right click and go to item properties, you get this window. And then right here, you can adjust the pitch of whatever is highlighted in semitones. So one number is a semitone. That's what they call half steps in other places of the world. So it's a half step. So if I went here, I went negative 5.2, which is 5.2 half steps lower than what you had. If I went positive 5.2, it'd be 5.2 half steps higher in pitch than what you'd have. So I'll remember this number, 5.2. Let's just set it back to 0 for now. Hit apply, hit OK. And then we're going to listen to this. And I have this, I have retune on here so we can see what the pitch is. Okay, so it's right around a D sharp. Your low tom, your floor tom, was also a D sharp, but an octave lower. And for most purposes, it's just too big of a gap for my taste. Like I said last week in the video, usually we're going for like a 1-3-5 interval kind of thing on toms. So basically, let me jump down here. I started with your low tom. Sorry, that's EQ. And I actually tuned your low tom negative 0.75 down in pitch. So it's like 3/4 of a half step to make your low tom basically a D natural. I felt it could go a tiny bit lower, and just for explanation purposes, I wanted to get on a white key instead of a black key to make explaining this slightly easier for my drummer brain. So I changed your floor tom to a D natural, and then I wanted your mid tom to be a major third up from that, and that would give us F sharp. So I ended up raising your middle tom pitch by 1/2 step to get up to F sharp. And then when I came up to the high tom was super high. So that's why we went in here and changed that to negative 5.2. And I just sort of had to guess. I could go by half steps, but they're drums. They're a little funky. So the extra 0.2 just, it got me closer to an A natural, which would be our 5th scale degree up from a D natural. So we wanted D, F sharp, A in your toms. So we're able to do that by changing the pitch. But this is sort of an algorithm in Reaper, and there is the potential to create artifacts in your sound, like kind of nasty sounding shit that you might not discover later on until you start like compressing and processing the piss out of these. So, ideally you're getting the pitch closer before you hit the record button by tuning. And you just got to practice tuning a lot. And tuning it takes a lifetime, man. I still struggle with it, honestly. I spend so much time doing that, and when I was younger, it took me days and days to try to figure out tuning. Drums is kind of tricky. So anyways, that's what we did. We changed the pitch of your toms. And then as far as EQ, let's look at your high tom. So I did the low cut because we don't want in there. Looks like I boosted here around 166 because I wanted a little more body in your tom-tom. This cut here on 3 at 250, there's probably some ugly ring in there. And then that's about all I did. So without EQ, with... So it just cleaned it up a little bit. It does sound quite a bit better with that. On our middle tom, it's a similar thing, right? The low cut, the boost here, but this boost is a little bit lower because that drum is a little bit lower in pitch to give it a little more body. And then this over here, it's in a slightly different place, I think. It's just getting rid of some of that ringiness, that ugly ringiness in the mid-range. Looking at your low tom. Okay, so this is a little different story here. Off. So it's pretty ugly without EQ. There's a lot of weird overtones and ringy stuff going on in here, which is normal for a 16-inch floor tom. I think probably ideally, before you hit record, you would be able to hear that maybe it's a little bit too ugly with overtones and stuff, and you'd fine-tune your tuning a little bit and fine-tune your muffling a little bit. Because these moves they're maybe a little drastic. We got the standard low cut here, which is actually a little bit more than I would want on a 16-inch floor tom. But it was just very boomy in here without it. And then these two cuts here are an effort to eliminate some of those mid-rangey, nasty overtones. And then I did a high shelf over here on 4, sort of cutting some of the high stuff, because we don't really need that on a 16-inch floor tom. And I was hearing some sort of abrasive kind of things up in that range. So this one got a little more surgical, but it definitely sounds better with it. Okay, moving on to kick. Kick. Sounds really nice. That's a pretty dry kick, which is cool. So these are pretty typical kick moves here. A very slight low cut, 1 here, just below 30. Basically, the human ear can't even hear 30 and below, so we just cut that out because we don't need it. And here. Had to let my dog out. 5, this is a boost in the low end. Because this is a kick drum, we want some low end in there. So I just kind of move this around. Usually it's like 100 hertz and below. And just kind of moved it where it sounded best. Just a little boost. It's easy to boost too much here and end up with a very boomy low kick thing. So you got to be conservative with that. This over here on 2 is a pretty good cut around 460. This is a very common move, anywhere between 300 and 600. We're usually cutting a fair amount of stuff out of the kick drum. This is the cardboard boxy kind of sound. And I just moved it around until I got it where it sounded good. And this pretty much will always make your kick drum sound a lot better. This little boost over here on 3 at 4,269 or 4.2K is to bring out some of the beater attack, just to get a little more punch on that. And then it looks like I did a little cut in the high end because we don't need that in there. Just remove some of that noise. So without, with, so it sounds a lot better. It's a little fatter, a little punchier, and much cleaner. On your non-beater side, your your resonant side head. Turn that back on. So I just used the same EQ on that. It's pretty much the same sound. It is a little different. If I were getting more nerdy, I'd probably go in here and do slightly different things, but it's the same idea. Let's move on to your cymbals. So hi-hat with foot. Okay, so no EQ. EQ. So it sounds way better, right? Huge low cut on this. We don't need any low end information on any cymbal if we're miking just cymbals. If these were overhead mics and we're getting sort of the whole kit, that would be a different story. But here we're just concerned with the actual cymbal sound. So we get rid of all those lows. We don't need that in there. There's an ugly kind of ring that we're hearing that happens right after the attack, and that ended up being here at 580, and I did a really drastic cut on that, probably more than I'd want to do, but that ring was pretty ugly, and that basically got rid of it. So that's what we did there. Moving on to closed hi-hat. Without. Again, just getting rid of that low end stuff, and there again another ugly ringy stuff right after the attack that you can hear. That ended up being around 780, so that's what that cut is for. And then moving on to open hi-hat. Okay, so this was just getting rid of the low stuff. The rest of it sounded great. Simple. Crash cymbal. Without. So you can hear in this, there's a lot of low-end information actually in this crash cymbal, and we just don't want that to be there. That's going to eat up a lot of space that could be used for other instruments once this goes into a piece of music. So a big low cut all the way up to almost 650, which is pretty drastic, but you can hear without it, it just sounds, it's like boomy, and like we don't want a crash cymbal to ever be boomy. So that's what that is for. And then I did a little boost, a little high shelf over here, to give it a little more shimmery brightness, because actually this cymbal was almost a little clanky and a little dull sounding. So that's what all that is. Ride cymbal, let's see. Okay, so again, the typical low cut. I did a cut over here around 4K. There was some harshness in this range that I wanted to take out. And then I did a boost up here, really high, around 13K, to add a little more air to the sound, give it a little bit of air. So without. With. So that sounds much better, much cleaner. And then the bell. Pretty similar thing on the bell of that same cymbal. Big low cut, and then this cut over here is to take out some harshness, and this is to add a little air. Okay, so, I know, that's a lot. So basically, I'm asking you to reproduce all of this. And it'll probably take you some time, but you're going to learn a lot by doing this. So I think it's super valuable. Maybe go in and tune your toms first, and then go in and EQ everything, pretty much the way I had it. And then we're going to add a compressor, that TDR compressor you downloaded from the beginning of the video, which I already put on this track, but let me delete that. So basically, you just click on a space there. I usually go down to developers, and I always remember it's called Tokyo Dawn Labs. Click on that, and then it's this one. I have a few different ones from that company, but this is the compressor that we want. Hit OK. Now it's on your track. And so we're going to put this on every single track, but we have to adjust it probably for each track manually. So snare drum, you go here, click on this. These are all like nice sort of mastering settings. I think for this, the warm setting here would sound good. Your drums and cymbals here are on the bright side, so giving them a little bit more warmth will make them sound better. Basically, you end up compressing things with more than one compressor over the process of recording, mixing, and mastering. And that's how you end up with a good final sound. It's not like you just stick one compressor on something and call it good. It goes back to the analog days where the preamps would have a little compression on them, the mixing board would have a little compression on them, and then they add external compressors after that. So that's why that stuff sounds so nice and warm, is because it had little amounts of compression over multiple phases of the process. So basically we have to do this digitally. So right now we're just going to add a little bit of warmth, a little bit of transparent compression to each of these samples, just to get them on their way to sounding great. So go with this warm, and then we're not going to talk about or mess with any of these settings right now. This plugin sounds great with the presets it has. We're just going to adjust the threshold to get the amount of gain reduction that we want. And for this, we're looking at like, 2 to 3 dB gain reduction from the compressor, which is very conservative. So basically, just run the sample, click on this knob and drag it up or down, and that'll adjust your threshold. And then you're just watching this meter over here to get in the 2 to 3 range. So right now it's a little too much. So we'll bring it down. There. So right about there is good. So you'll want to do that. You could just drag it over to your next track and then move to that and then listen and adjust. So that ends up being pretty much the same on your rim shot, which is easy. But if we were to drag this over to, say, the crash cymbal, it could end up being a little different. Pretty close, actually. You could go a little more on that one, maybe. Maybe around there. Okay, so that's easy enough. Then we got to bounce all this stuff out again. But we also, by adding EQ and compression, we changed the nice levels that you had initially. So you should change those levels so they're all consistent again. So let's go back up to our snare. So looking at this meter down here, after EQ and compression, that's coming in at -7, which is different from the -12-ish that you had initially. So you'll have to go back, right-click, I'm sorry, not right-click, whatever your key command was for that normalization with the SWS extension. So it's Command N for me. And then I'm changing that back to -12. We'll see how it does. So that put it at -8. It's probably not responding as well to that because of the plugins that's on it. But that's an okay range. really we just want a consistency amongst all these samples. So when you use them, they're all about the same volume to begin with. So you want to do that before you bounce them out. So just go in and let's see if we can get that closer to negative 12 just by guessing. So it only went down, like what if we changed it to negative 18? See what it gives us there. Yeah, so negative 13. Maybe we could get even closer if we move it to like negative 17. Negative 12.7. So maybe go in and change them all to negative 17. I know this is a little funky, but sometimes it's just like that. The plugins sort of mess up the way things are read, and you just got to kind of figure it out. So you could go in and change them all to negative 17, perhaps, and maybe they'll get you close. What if we did it on the cross stick here? Let's see what that cross stick is first. Okay, so that cross stick is actually too hot. Why is it too hot? We're still 0 here. Well, let's just change it. What if we go to negative 12 on that? If we go to negative 17 on that? Okay, so I mean it's not working as smoothly as I would like for this, but you may have to guess a little bit. But I think it's worth going through this process to make sure they're all basically the same. They don't have to be perfect. I think, you know, within 1 dB is totally cool. Okay, so now as far as bouncing out, the deal with plugins is that you have to bounce shit out as a master mix. If you bounce things out as stems, they don't contain the plugin effects on them when they bounce out. It has to be a master mix. Now, there might be a better way to do this from what I'm about to show you, but if I were doing it, this is kind of how I would do it. I go up to snare. You're going to have to get your time selection dialed in manually again in order to make this work, which is kind of a pain in the ass, but it's doable. So just drag that over to the end. And let's see here. So that's our time selection for this snare sample. We're not concerned about anything else. And then what we have to do is mute all of these other tracks. If they're muted, they won't bounce out when you bounce out as a master mix. The master mix will only bounce out the tracks that are enabled. And we have the time selection for that. So basically, now you go to your render window. You're going to stay on master mix here, but we need to change this to time selection. I'm just going to throw this in my documents so we can double check it before I turn off this video. 001 snare, render, show and finder. There you go. That works. Okay. And then let's double check this by opening a new project tab. Coming here. Okay, and let's give that a listen. And it should sound exactly like this one. And it does. Cool. All right, so that's the process you got to go through. I know it's a little tedious, and it's probably a better way to do it in Reaper, but I'm not sure what that would be. But whatever, it won't take too long. It's a lot of steps to remember in this video. Ask me any questions if you have any, but basically, this is the last step to these samples. So once we get these, I promise we're done tweaking these and we can start actually using them. But it's cool. They're going to sound good. So awesome. All right. I'll talk to you later.